So good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's conference with Le Cercle des Langues. Tonight we are going to be discussing relative pronouns. So who, whom, whose, which, and that, and their correct use. This evening's conference is for level A1 to A2. The conference will last about 25 minutes, and we will have the last 5 minutes to do an answer and question session. So if you have any questions, please either write them into the chat or on a piece of paper so that we could discuss them when we complete the conference. Let's begin. In this evening's conference, we have 4 parts. The first part being the introduction. The second part will be relative pronouns and the basic usage. Number 3, we will look at expanding your knowledge of relative pronouns. And for the last part, combining sentences and practice activities. So let's start with the introduction. What are relative pronouns? Relative pronouns are words used to connect clauses or sentences, and they help us give more information about a noun. Common relative pronouns that you find in English are who, whom, whose, which, and that. So what are the basic uses of these pronouns? Who, whom, and whose? To understand how to use who, whom, and whose, you first have to understand the difference between the subject, the objects, and the possessive forms. So subjects in a sentence do the action. For example, he loves movies. She goes to school. We enjoy Chinese food. The equivalent of the subjects in French would be je, tu, il, elle, nous, vous, and il ou elle pour le pluriel. So we have the same thing in English, and it is who does the action. Your objects, they are receiving the action. For example, en français, vous avez le complément du object direct et indirect. In English, we have the object which generally follows the verb. For example, the teachers like him. Thomas knows her. The actor smiled at us. And then your possessive forms. They tell us the person something belongs to. For example, his bike is broken. I like her new book. The teacher graded our homework. So when we start with who, it is used for people. It connects the subject of the sentence with a description. For example, the teacher who helps me is kind. We use who when talking about the subject being a person of the sentence. So who is a subject pronoun like he, she, and we. So when asking a question, we would use who to know c'est qui. Par exemple, who made the birthday cake? Qui a fait le gâteau? Who is in the kitchen? Who is going to do the dishes? So now that we have looked at who, we want to look at whom. Whom is used for people, but it's more formal and often used when the person is the object of the sentence. For example, the man whom I met at the party was very interesting. If I use this sentence in a different way, for example, I met the man at the party. The man is the object. So now, because I am making the object the main part of the sentence, I use whom. So the man whom I met at the party was very interesting. Whom is often replaced with who in everyday conversations, but it's good to know for formal writing and reading. Whom is an object pronoun, like him, her, and us. We use whom to ask which person receives the action. Whom are you going to invite? Whom did he blame for the accident? And whom did he hire to do the job? So as you see, you can replace it with who as well. Who are you going to invite? Who did he blame for the accident? Who did he hire to do the job? When we look at whose shows possession. It tells us who something belongs to. For example, the man whose car was stolen is very upset. So now we are looking at possessive. A useful tip to using whose, it is to show that something belongs to someone or something. Whose is a possessive pronoun like his, her, and our. We use whose to find out which person something belongs to. For example, whose camera is this? Whose dog is barking outside? Whose cell phone keeps ringing? Another tip is there will always be a noun that follows whose. So whose camera, whose dog, whose cell phone. It is always accompanied by a noun. So let's do this activity together. Let's start with number 1. We need to use who, whose, or whom. So let's have a look. The woman who lives next door is friendly. Please put your responses into the chat so we can have a look at some of the answers. The woman lives next door is very friendly. Raymond says, who? Yes, thank you. So we've got who, Christelle, who, Sophie, who. Wonderful. who, and that is correct. The woman who lives next door is very friendly. Number 2, the student asked the question, is my friend? Which is correct? Okay. So in fact, number 2 is also the student who asked the question. Because remember that we use whose for when there is a noun that follows, Number 3, the girl, yes, Raymond, in fact, a noun has to follow. Look at number 3. The girl whom dog is barking is my neighbor. What is number 3? Let's have a look in the chat. Lovely, yes. Because I have a noun that follows, I will say the girl whose dog is barking is my neighbor. Number 4, the person we saw yesterday was very tall. Severine, the person whom we saw yesterday was very tall. The person whom we saw yesterday. You can see that when you use whom, we have to follow with a subject and a verb. The person whom we saw. Because if we look at number 1, the woman who lives, directly followed by a verb. Well done. Number 5, the colleague helped me is very nice. What will I add? Who? Wonderful. The colleague who helped me is very nice. Number 6, the family house we visited is very nice. What are we using? Wonderful. The family whose house. Why? Because there is a noun. The person idea was great is getting a prize. Wonderful. Whose? Why? Because we have the noun idea. And the last one, the person called you is waiting outside. Severine, beautiful. Thank you, Raymond. Yes, Christelle, the person who called you is waiting outside. So be careful, Stefan, because we said when we have whom, we need a subject and a verb to follow. Here, we only have the verb. That means it is who. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. Let's have a look. So, the woman who, the student who, the girl whose dog, the person whom we saw, the colleague whom helped me. Now, generally, for number 5, I would say the colleague who helped me. The colleague whom helped me, but why is it acceptable here? Because it is formal. The colleague whom helped me. Because it's formal, we have an exception. The person whom we saw, the family whose house we visited, the person whose idea, and the person who called you is waiting outside. Expanding your knowledge of relative pronouns which and that. Which is used for things and animals. It connects a noun to a description. For example, the book which I am reading is interesting. A useful tip is use which to add information about things, animals, and situations. For example, I visited a park yesterday which had beautiful flowers. It is the park which had beautiful flowers. The movie which we watched last night was funny. It's the movie. When talking about things you like or dislike, use which to explain more about them. So using which can help you give more information. So let's try it for ourselves. Try using which in a sentence and put your responses into the chat. Let's have a look. What do you think? I would start with 1. The house which we visited had blue walls. For example, the house which we visited had blue walls. So that's my example. Because we are talking about this house, I want to give you more information. So I say the house which we visited had blue walls. Do you have any examples that you would like to share? I like the movie which has a romantic story. Beautiful. Yes. The book which I am reading actually is very interesting. Beautiful example. Thank you. So now you can see which kind of examples we can use with which allows us to add more information. That can be used for people, things, and animals, often in informal contexts. For example, the book that I read was amazing. So we use that when the sentence is not about showing possession and you want to keep it simple. So here are 2 real-life examples using that. The job that I applied for is located in London. In the sentence, that is used to provide essential information about the job, making the clause restrictive. I have a friend that loves hiking. Here, that is used to identify a specific friend. It's essential to know which friend is being referred to. Both examples demonstrate how that is used in essential, restrictive, relative clauses to define something or specify something. So just for information, to give a small summary, we know that we can use who and that for people, and we can use which and that for things. So that can be used for both. So if you are in doubt, you may use that. So for more information, the job that I applied for is located in London. In the sentence, that is used to provide essential information about the job, making the clause restrictive. An essential or relative clause is a part of a sentence that provides information necessary to identify or specify the noun it describes. Without this information, the sentence would not fully make sense. Can which be used for restrictive clauses too? Yes. Which can sometimes be used in restrictive relative clauses, but it is more common in non-restrictive clauses, where the information adds extra details but is not essential for identifying the noun. When can which be used in restrictive clauses? In informal contexts. Which can sometimes be used in restrictive clauses, but it is less common than that. Generally, that feels more natural and direct. An example using which in a restrictive clause, which is informal. The book which I am reading is very interesting. While grammatically correct, it sounds a little more formal than using that. The book that I am reading is very interesting. So let's choose the correct relative pronoun, which or that, for each sentence. Please put your correct answers into the chat. The book, which or that I borrowed. So we've got which. Okay, we'll have a look at the second part. Wonderful. Number 2, the car, which or that is parked outside. The car that is parked outside. Okay, so we've got which for number 1, that or maybe which for number 2. Number 3, the movie we watched last night. Which we watched last night. Wonderful. The house we live in is quite old. The house which we live in or that. Let's have a look at number 5. The cat sleeps on the couch is very lazy. Which or that? Which, okay. Let's have a look at the answers. The book which I borrowed, it adds extra information and is non-restrictive, providing more details about the book. It could be a non-essential clause, making which more common. The book which I borrowed. Number 2, the car that is parked outside belongs to my neighbor. We use that for things that are necessary to identify the subject, and this is a restrictive clause. The movie that we watched last night was very scary. We use that for things that are necessary to identify the subject, and this is a restrictive clause. The house that we live in is quite old. We use that because it's a restrictive clause, meaning the information is necessary to describe which house is being referred to. The cat that sleeps on the couch is very lazy. That in the informal context, especially when it's essential to know which cat is being discussed. In the last part, we look at combining sentences and practice activities. So you can use relative pronouns to combine 2 simple sentences into one. For example, simple sentences. I have a friend, she lives in London. When I combine the 2, I have a friend who lives in London. This makes your speech and writing sound more fluent. So let's choose the correct relative pronoun. The teacher who or which helped me is very kind. So we say who. The dog that or whom barked all night was very noisy. That. And the last one, the boy whom or whose bicycle was broken asked for help. Let's look at which one it is. The teacher who Helped me is very kind. Why who? Because it refers to a person. It is the subject of the clause. The dog that barked all night because it refers to a thing, a dog, in a restrictive clause. The boy whose bicycle. Why? Because we are showing possession. We are referring to the bicycle. In conclusion, relative pronouns are essential tools that help you connect ideas and add clarity to your sentences. By mastering when to use who, whom, whose, and which, and that, you can communicate more effectively and make your speech and writing more fluid. Keep practicing these pronouns through exercises and in everyday conversations to improve your confidence and accuracy. Remember, we use who for people, the subject. We use whom for people, and that's the object. We use whose for the possession, so there is always a noun. We use which for things or animals, and we use that for both people and things in informal speech. So thank you everyone for joining me for the conference this evening. Do you have any questions or comments on this evening's conference? No? It's all clear? I really hope that it was easy to understand. And if not, have a look at the conference PDF this evening and re-look at all of the examples and try to do the examples yourself. So thank you everyone for joining me this evening. Happy New Year, and I will see you on Friday for another conference. Good evening, everyone.